This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Tuesday, June 20th, 2017. It is OnePlus 5 Day, and I have one, and so does my guest, the wonderful and amazing Andrew Martonik of Android Central. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, thanks for having me on. And yes, I also have my OnePlus 5 here in its nice rosewood case.
I think all the cool kids have a OnePlus 5 this week. I mean, there was an embargo, so all of us who have, some sort of publication channel of any significance, I think, have a OnePlus 5 this week. Good news, though, right? I mean, it is a decent phone for the money. What did you take? Let's get started on this.
Yeah, I think all these discussions about the OnePlus 5 start with the price. I mean, $479 kind of sets the stage, and I know a lot of people have high expectations of OnePlus phones, but and of course, they're talking a big game about the cameras. We can get to that in a minute, but I think as far as like the base level, what you get for the money, they're still, completely outpacing their price, and that's the important part.
And I completely agree with you. Like, people are going to watch my half-hour review video because, I just I didn't do it live because I couldn't because it was embargoed, but I basically treated it as a live video. I recorded with the HTC U11, which I want to discuss later. But basically what I'm saying is that I went on and on about this, the fact that you're getting a solid foundation. You're getting flagship grade hardware all around, right?
Yeah, and I would say that the only thing that's lacking there for me is probably the display. I don't really care about 1080p necessarily. I think it looks good in terms of like crispness, but it's still a little dull and not quite as bright. I mean, I'm used to using an LG G6, Galaxy S8, like the fantastic, in the U11, really, really good displays. And so I feel like it's a little bit lacking having the same display after the OnePlus 3, same display.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think for me, I would put it slightly differently insofar that I feel that the U11 display doesn't hit the mark for me. It's primarily in brightness.
Sure.
It's definitely a better display in terms of, color balance and all that, but it's not bright enough for me in sunlight when I take photos. Whereas the OnePlus display, even though it's 1080p and it's no change from last year's 3T, is really bright, which I think for me as an older person now started to really get very helpful.
I think it definitely helps that you're working with the base level of AMOLED, so you have that lower reflectivity as well. Like that definitely helps, especially if you compare it, like you said, to the U11 or G6. I just think that, overall, when you talk about the colors, the saturation, everything, it's just not quite there. But again, it's not. It's one of those cost-cutting measures.
Yeah, and the other thing is, the lack of OIS, which we're going to get to, right? Because that's an expensive proposition, especially on two lenses. Then the other thing that's always been an issue for me with OnePlus, considering what their kind of mission statement is the lack of SD card support.
Right.
Not a huge deal, right?
I'm of two minds there because they at least offer the 128 gig model from the start this time, instead
absolutely.
of doing that extra special edition release. But yeah, it's kind of one of those things where Huawei usually does. It's a dual SIM phone, but you can use that second SIM slot as an SD card slot, and that would kind of be something where they could just meet in the middle.
Yeah, I think it's kind of odd considering who they are and who they're going after. In the same way as the Pixel and the Nexus hasn't had an SD card slot since, the second Nexus, in fact, because I think the Nexus 1 was the only one with an SD card slot. So those are my only, minor gripes. And lack of waterproofing is obviously an issue, but I think that's because, we're used to it now on a lot of devices.
Even HTC got there eventually.
Finally, yeah, but they killed the headphone jack, which I'm still vexed about very majorly. Mostly because their adapter that comes in the box stinks in terms of sound quality. And when you see, we should talk about that real quickly. I'll insert it in here. LG is launching a G6 Plus, which we might be getting in the US, which is essentially a G6 with more storage. And
new colors.
The new colors, thank you. and the hi-fi quad DAC, which, trust me, the base G6 already has a pretty amazing audio output on the headphone jack, better than the U11's little headphone dongle. And then on top of that, now we're going to get the quad DAC, which to me made the V20 the best sounding phone of all time.
And unfortunately, they did all these weird SKUs where you got wireless charging, but not the quad DAC, or you got neither, depending on where you were in the world. So more
that's
quad
resolved
DAC.
now, but it's still a Snapdragon 821. It's still, and there was always SD support, so the storage wasn't really a big issue for me on the G6 original. Mm-hmm. But I just want to squeeze it in there since we're talking about the G6 Plus and we're talking about headphone jacks and things. The OnePlus 5 has a headphone jack. Thank goddess.
And they trolled us kind of in their announcement. They had like the render up on the screen where they were like, and we decided to remove the headphone jack because we have USB-C. And then it like flipped over and they put the little hole there. So they know it's a talking point.
I missed the actually like the broadcast because I just had other things to deal with. But I'll have to watch that.
It was, that kind of speaks to, like you said, they know who their audience is. That like they would not put up with removing the headphone jack, but usually that's kind of the same group that wanted the SD card. So it's really interesting. But they've put down their foot and said we're not doing SD card because whatever, it makes the experience a little more confusing or something. But their user base is the power user that wants the SD card.
Right. I mean, they haven't had the SD card since what? They had it on the first one.
Right.
That's it, right? The second one dropped it, correct?
I think so.
I need to check. Oh boy. Somebody correct us in the comments.
I know that the OnePlus X dropped it, and everything from that point forward didn't have it.
Yeah, I think for me, by the way, if you're hearing some construction in the background, there is some workers in the apartment above me, so just don't worry about it. We'll filter it out. I think for me, it's a small price to pay to have a 1080p display, a no SD and no waterproofing for the price point that they're selling at. Even though it's gone up a bit, it's $480 for a 6 gig, 64 gigabyte slate gray. Is that the color?
Yeah.
And then 8 gigs, 128 gigabyte. For a midnight black color, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, and I think that's reasonable. I think that's a reasonable price jump.
Absolutely, for what you're getting. I mean, you've got the 8 gig version, right?
Yeah, I do. I think that's what all the reviewers have.
Yeah, that's interesting because I'm kind of wondering how much of a difference it makes. Frankly, I think it's overkill. Like, I don't think I ever ran out of RAM on... I don't run out of RAM on most 4 gigs phones. I don't think I ever run out of RAM on 6 gig phones.
No, I mean, I used the OnePlus 3T for a long time, and I never had any performance issues there. So it's really interesting OnePlus is talking up, smoothness and consistency and all that. I mean, obviously you get a lot of that just from the Snapdragon 835.
Right.
I mean, I looked at my average RAM usage. They give you a little display of it in the settings, and I never got beyond 5 gigabytes. So
I never got beyond 4. So you see, I think comes up how many apps you have running, how many tabs you have open in other words, like in browser speak,
Right.
You're right, but that's the thing though. Like the price has gone up, but it's justified to me simply because of that Snapdragon 835. That chip, man, like it is delightful. It is such a masterpiece.
The software is fast. It is pretty insane.
But you know what I find, and you might correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I feel from my experience that the U11 is faster.
I think they're neck and neck personally. And,
it's close, right?
And I could say that I think that the scrolling performance is more consistent on the U11.
Correct. That's what I think I'm talking about.
Just really tight to your finger. But the OnePlus 5 has improved dramatically there from the 3T. Like you set them side by side and scroll up and down in a web page, and it tracks to your finger a lot tighter on the OnePlus 5.
Definitely. I think there's definitely a latency improvement from last year, but the U11 still has way better latency. And to me, it's when I say it's not as smooth, it's sometimes the scrolling hangs up a bit on the OnePlus 5 still, whereas, I expect that not to be the case. The Galaxy S8 does the same thing, but the Galaxy S8 is really heavily loaded with animations and stuff. And I think I really feel, I've reviewed all three of these phones, the S8 and the U11 for Chip Check, and the OnePlus 5, I believe Chance is reviewing for Chip Check, so I'm doing it just for my YouTube channel and here on the podcast. But my feeling is that the Galaxy S8 is kind of purposely maybe not throttled, but balanced in terms of performance to battery life ratio, right? At least the regular S8. Because the S8 Plus has more battery to play with. But I feel that they've hit a good compromise in maximizing battery life yet not destroying the performance. But with the U11 and the OnePlus 5, you can really see what an 835 can do.
Yeah, they seem like they're just, full on out there. They don't have as kind of elongated transition effects and things like that. Like they're just trying to be as snappy as possible. And again, for the power user that knows what OnePlus is and wants a OnePlus 5, they want that to be as fast as possible. Just like you tap it and it, it's wide open. They don't care about the extra transition effects. And I think that's where you draw the line between the Galaxy S8 and, the U11 and OnePlus 5.
For sure. And then, what do you think of battery life? For me, I feel battery life is slightly worse than the U11, which in itself is worse than the Galaxy S8. But that's my assessment, and it's really based only 5 days of use. So I can't really say that I have a hard number. I didn't run any benchmarks. I would if I was doing this with Chip Check, but I don't run benchmarks on my own reviews, really.
Yeah, I found the U11 actually be pretty good. The U11 was my bare minimum of acceptable. I could push it through a full day every single time. But it would do it with, not a whole lot left behind. The Galaxy S8 was about the same, kind of depending on whether I used always on display or not. That's a nice, powered suck. But
that
the OnePlus
makes a big difference in the resolution that you set it
of course,
as well,
and
right?
I run my Galaxy S8 in Quad HD Plus or whatever they call it. But the OnePlus 5 I feel was a solid maybe hour a longer than the U11 and the Galaxy S8. Not so much in screen on time. I could only get the same amount of 3 to 4 hours of screen on time. But when I wasn't using it, it just idled forever. It didn't, when the screen was off, it felt like it wasn't doing anything and it wasn't losing any battery. So some days where I was, over the weekend, I was doing a lot of writing on my review. The phone was just off, sitting on the table for 2 hours at a time. At the end of the day, I had 65% battery left because I just didn't touch it and it wasn't doing anything. I felt like the Galaxy S8, it kind of is just, it's going to drain and be dead by the end of the day, no matter what.
Yeah, I think you're right. But for me, I'm feeling that at least initially, and I stay tuned on the verdict for this over the next few weeks as I continue using the OnePlus 5, but I'm feeling it's a little below what I was experiencing with the Galaxy S8 and the U11. But I don't know why. I mean, it could be my launcher. I'm using Google Now launcher. I'm not using their launcher. Who knows? But I mean, you're right. When it's resting, it's super awesome. And the Galaxy S8 has that problem with the always on screen, which I like to use because it is kind of a cool feature.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm running mine at 1080p, by the way, my S8. Just because, and this is the thing, my eyes aren't that awesome. And I feel that it upscales 1080p automatically in hardware somewhere. But I don't find that I see much of a difference. I could be wrong because, my eyes. But so that's why I'm not too vexed by 1080p displays. But it's true that display on the Galaxy S8, oh my God. I mean, come on, right? I mean, it's the best of the best. So
I mean,
hard to compare.
It's completely next level just in everything that it does. I mean, I could take or leave the curves on the Galaxy S8, whatever, but just the overall quality of it from every angle, every lighting condition is great.
Yeah, it's impressive. So now that we've kind of talked about the fact that it's justified, I think, in its price, especially at $480. Look, unless you want the color midnight black, which I think is kind of a weird thing that they only made one device, each device has a different color, right?
I think the bigger thing for me is the colors are so similar.
So similar. I know. If you don't see them side by side, you wouldn't know which one.
So it's why bother? Why bother with the colors? I don't know.
So I would honestly pick the 6 gig, 64 gig version, unless you feel that 64 gig isn't enough and you don't have an SD card slot. So you have to keep that in mind. But I think So $480 for the kind of performance and battery life and general flagshipness that you're getting, other than the waterproofing and the 1080p display, is a pretty awesome proposition. But here's kind of the elephant in the room, and I want to bring this up because you and I are kind of photography folk in the sense that we really love camera phones and taking photos with them. And for me, it seems that OnePlus is really positioning this device as a camera phone, and I don't feel that it's good enough to match the best of the best.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the issue is it starts with their positioning. I mean, it says dual cameras, clearer photos right on the side of the box. I mean, this is their marketing. This is what they're going for. And it's not quite there. I mean, I think that they made smart improvements, right? f1.7 lens on the main camera is smart. New sensor is smart. Losing OIS in order to get this secondary camera out there, not very smart.
Don't even get me started. I don't understand why they did that. They have small pixels to start with, 1.12 microns on the main camera. So they dropped the f-stop to 1.7, which is great, right? But then they remove OIS, which is one of the things that I think kind of makes a phone these days. The Pixel is the exception, but even then I find that I sometimes push the Pixel to the point where I wish I had OIS, right? And if I push the Galaxy S8 or the U11 that far, the OIS saves my ass.
Yeah, I think the problem is, we're just talking about the main camera first, because that's, what you can directly compare to others.
Yeah.
It just... for the most part, it takes pretty good photos. I'd say better than the OnePlus 3T, like pretty solidly. But
it's definitely better than the last years. Absolutely. I wanted you guys to know that this is a better camera overall, despite the lack of OIS. But right. I feel that they could have done better.
I just look at, we were super skeptical at the start with the G6's main camera. We were like, what's up with this older sensor? It has small pixels as well. Like, what are they doing with this? But the G6 with OIS and some awesome processing takes really, really good photos out of the main camera. So that OnePlus could have done something like this, with small pixels isn't the end of the world if they had OIS in there and they could, do slightly longer shutter speeds, lower ISOs. I think the problem that I found was the OnePlus 5s kept with pretty quick shutter speeds because it knows it can't go very long. But the ISO got really high late at night, and their processing just couldn't smooth it out. So I found a lot of grain in photos.
Oh my God, it's insane. Camera. Watch my video. I know it's a long 30 minutes, but guys, it's worth it. YouTube.com/MiriamJoire, MYRAMJOIRE, which is my legal name. Go check it out because look, and I'll put it in the notes for this podcast. I think the problem is exactly what you said. The G6, and I think this is where LG's years and years of using the same 1.13 micron sensor technology, right, has made them develop algorithms that really kick ass. Since the G4, they've been using this f/1.8. Is it 1.8? Yes, 1.8. Mm-hmm. 1.12 or 1.13 micron pixels, right? And they've developed these algorithms that just kick ass. And then OnePlus just doesn't have that expertise. And it's like the same thing as a lot of people, think that, you can put together a flagship phone with the supply chain in Shenzhen now. Of course, anybody can do that at a reasonable price, but it's the software, right? Qualcomm obviously has a lot of IP around imaging that I hope OnePlus leveraged to some extent, like HDR plus. Well, there's, Google has its own, but I think there's a feedback loop here. I think that what Google did with the Pixel with 821, maybe Qualcomm was involved in some ways, and that some of that improved ISP software ended up in the 835, and you can benefit from that if you have an 835 and you pay the right licensing fees to Qualcomm. Now, whether OnePlus did or not, I honestly feel that they didn't, because there isn't that. First of all, there's no HDR plus type mode like we see on the U11 or the Pixel. And secondly, as you said, the graininess is impossible. And then, let's talk about this 2x zoom f/over 2.6 with even smaller 1 micron pixel camera, because that one in low light, it's rough.
Yeah, and it's not even directly 2x either, which kind of adds to it a little bit.
True.
It's like 1.7x, so the effective focal length is about 40 millimeters, which I just don't feel like is a big enough jump from the main camera, which is, like 24 millimeters. I don't feel like it's a big enough jump to justify the fact that in order to move to that lens, in anything but wide open bright sunlight, it's just not good enough. It's too grainy. Sure, you have 20 megapixels, you can zoom in a little bit, but the grain out of, such a narrow aperture. I mean, when was the last time we saw a camera with an f2.6 lens on a smartphone? It's been years. We're well beyond that. So, and especially when it's feeding into such small pixels. So it's kind of odd to see. I mean, they're not really playing up the zoom all that much. And, I love the G6 for having that second wide angle camera that you can just switch to, get really interesting photos out of.
I love it too.
So I understand that. And I'm sure you've used the iPhone 7 Plus a lot more than I have. Because
not that much, to be honest, actually.
Well, that's definitely more than I have. I've just played around with it. But, being able to just toggle between the two cameras is good. But the second camera, it's like, I can't shake the feeling that, was this worth, potentially compromising the main camera for? I find that hard. That's a hard sell for me.
I agree. I mean, look, if you look at the G6, right, the secondary camera, let's see, I'm looking at my review right now to find out what was the f-stop on that secondary camera.
It is f2.4.
Yeah, and so that's about the worst we see, right?
But
because
that's still the same sensor and pixel size as the main camera as well, so that helps.
And the G5 and V20 had a smaller number of megapixels with slightly, I think the same size pixels, but they had f1 2.4 as well. Or was it 2.2? Oh,
I think it's 2.4.
Can't remember.
But yeah.
But anyway, the point is that's about as bad as it gets, right? In the world of smartphones. 2.6 is like, oh my God, really? For a long time, lots of phones had f over 2.8. That was kind of the standard. It's kind of a long time ago, though. And so, I feel the same way. I do feel that there is enough of a zoom at 1.7 to make it worth my while from time to time. But given the choice, as you said, I think I'd prefer the G6 wide angles lens as my second lens than a zoom lens.
And I think above both, I would prefer to just let's go all out on the main 16 megapixel camera.
Let's get us bigger pixels on the NOIS on that main camera. I agree 100%. Yeah. That's the biggest thing because, the G6 has OIS on the main camera at least, even though the pixels aren't that big. And they have really good processing algorithms. So, yeah, I don't know. The results speak for themselves. In good light, this camera is brilliant. And in low light, it just starts falling apart. Exponentially gets worse, right?
Yeah.
And, again, no OIS means you can't take long exposures easily without a tripod. There's a whole bunch of issues. And don't even get me started on the portrait mode. It is so useless on this phone. It is so poorly implemented. The quality of that portrait mode needs a lot of love. And we know this is hard to pull off. Apple did it as a beta for a while. Then they made it public until they felt it was right.
Huawei took multiple generations too.
To finally get to a point. They're pretty good though, I have to say right now.
Right. So the issue with that portrait mode, to explain further, is that it doesn't necessarily properly figure out where that focal plane should be to actively blur the background. So you get like foreground portions that are, selectively blurred. And obviously when your eye looks at that, it goes, what? That's not supposed to be out of focus.
Yeah. And so if you look at my video, I did a comparison by taking a still subject. I couldn't have a person repeat the same pose twice. I used a can of yerba mate and I put it in bright light, and I took a photo with portrait mode and a photo with macro mode with the main camera. There's no macro mode, but it obviously was close up enough that it was essentially a macro shot. So it means that the background's going to be really defocused, right? Because f1.7 does that. Mm-hmm. And guess what? Honestly, other than the better geometry of the portrait shot, because it combines the two images and there's not as much geometric distortion because you're not as close, you don't have that fisheye effect as much. Other than that, there was really not much of an improvement to bokeh in the background, A, and B, there was so much more detail in the main cam photo on the actual can itself versus versus the portrait shot that kind of blurred everything in a weird kind of mushy way for me. Now,
I completely agree. When it comes to macro shots, the main camera is way better. I mean, f1.7 can give you that background blur by default just by getting in close and using tap to focus.
Absolutely. And so that's, just look, we're not trying to say that you shouldn't buy a OnePlus 5. I certainly think it's one of the best flagships for the money. And you certainly should not feel like the OnePlus 5 camera is going to let you down. Overall, it's pretty solid. It's better than the 3T, but it's not to the level of what you get with a U11, G6, Pixel, GS8. And that's just the reality of it. If you're willing to live with that, you will not feel let down by the OnePlus 5. And so the only time this rears its ugly head is in low light. And portrait mode is a gimmick. It might get better as software improves. The zoom can be helpful, like it is for the Huawei phones and the iPhone 7 Plus. And that's kind of the takeaway for me for the camera, really.
Yeah, I have a camera comparison against the Galaxy S8 going up on Android Central early tomorrow morning, but I can spoil it.
So that would be yesterday, I guess, in case you...
Yesterday, when you're listening to this.
I fixed it for you.
So that'll already be up, but I mean, my basic conclusion is the same thing. When you just look at the OnePlus 5's photos straight out of the camera, not comparing to anything else, you're pretty happy with them. They're really, solid photos. They tend to be balanced with just a little bit of color. But it's just when you set it next to the Galaxy S8, which I would say is even maybe a small step below the Pixel G6 U11 in some cases. But,
yep.
The GS8 obviously is kind of the standard that everybody, are you below or above the GS8 kind of thing?
Well, I think a lot of people are going to have that phone. So it's a good, measuring stick, right?
So when you set it next to the GS8, you're like, well, it's just the GS8 just has a little more crispness, sharper edges, especially when you zoom in, you notice these things. And then at night, you notice, wow, the GS8 can take a brighter photo without cranking up the ISO. You know what I mean?
And then you take a photo of the same thing with the U11, and it's again twice as bright.
Right. So it's kind of one of those things where, like you said, the OnePlus 5, it's not giving you bad photos. You just don't notice some of the intricacies of what it's incapable of doing until you set it next to one of these higher end phones that has larger pixels with the same aperture and OIS, and obviously years more experience doing the processing.
And probably royalties paid to Qualcomm for their ISP
Oh, absolutely.
Software. Which, again, I could be wrong. Please, Eric, email me if I'm incorrect and you're listening to this podcast about the Qualcomm royalties. You might not be able to reveal this, but I'd be really curious to know how much of Qualcomm's software you're using for this phone this time around, because I really believe that what Qualcomm's offers out of the box in terms of image processing on the 835 is top notch. Probably for the first time. I mean, they've always been good, but this is at the realm of great now.
But we know it takes lots of fine tuning. I mean, we talk about the portrait mode needing lots of work, obviously, in terms of it takes thousands and thousands of photos and analyzing how things work. But even the main camera, like this is not a solved science where you can say apply these exact processing features to every photo and it'll be fine. We know from what Google does with the HDR Plus that there's way more variables involved in getting a good photo out of a main camera.
Yeah, I think also, every combination of hardware and software is going to be slightly different, right? So there's no kind of cure-all solution, but usually using a set of algorithms that has been developed by a chipset manufacturer, can help if you don't have that in-house expertise. In the case of LG and Samsung, they have that in-house expertise. And I think does too now, as they very clearly demonstrated with the Pixel XL and Pixel. But yeah, look, I think I'm excited about this phone, even though it does look a little bit like an iPhone, doesn't it?
Sure. I mean, they're not going to be able to shake that. It's kind of, I think that's along the same lines as this dual camera marketing. They set themselves up for that comparison by going with this hardware design in the same way that they set themselves up with really high expectations on the camera.
Yeah, I think that the other thing for me is that you have this design that is kind of, how do you do a phone with dual camera if you don't want to use up the middle of the phone where the battery and other things are going to live, right? I mean, there's
the G6 isn't exactly svelte in order to do its dual camera.
Right. And I mean, if you look, the alternative is the P10 basically and P9, right? And that is just like having a glass bar at the top instead. Like, I don't know. I don't think there's a solution. The other thing I want to point out, and I pointed this out in my review, and Andrew, correct me if you disagree, but I think if you hold the phone, it feels great in hand. It's really beautifully made. And it has these kind of tapered edges on left and right that an iPhone doesn't have. And even though on photos, it really kind of has a very strong similarity to the iPhone 7 Plus. Once you see it in person, it looks and feels, especially from the front, like a OnePlus device to me. There is that kind of slightly rounded top and bottom, right? Curve on the actual, what looks like a straight line is actually round a little bit. And to me, those are kind of trademarks of what a OnePlus phone looks and feels like. But it doesn't have that strong personality the OnePlus 3 and OnePlus 3T had, which really marked it as this is a OnePlus device. This is more like generic, kind of blob of a phone, right?
Yeah, I mean, the way I wrote it in my review was, think about generic, quote unquote, smartphone shape, and this is that. I mean, you like you said, you feel more of the changes than you see. The taper on the sides is definitely better than the recent iPhones. I think it's more ergonomic to the hand, the way that has a flat edge and then it transitions nicely, rather than kind of just doing that swooping, even corner that the iPhone does to a straight flat back. I think it's a little bit nicer to hold than the OnePlus 3T as well, even though they're the same dimensions, basically. The OnePlus 5 is just a little thinner, but I think it's just the way that it's all rounded feels a lot nicer. And sure, they're just never going to be able to shake that iPhone lookalike type of thing, but I'm not sure how much that's really going to influence many people's buying decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want to move on to the next phone, or do you think you're done?
I just think that I don't want people to get the wrong overall thought on this from the way we talked about the camera. I think that the interesting thing about it is, even though it's cheaper than these other phones, it does so many things as good or better than the other devices in terms of all the specs you get. The fingerprint sensor is on the front where where you can actually reach it and use it every single time. Cough, cough, Samsung. And it doesn't do anything. It doesn't try to do too much in the hardware and fail. I think that, we've seen other phones that have done that, have done this, and it's at the same time, the software is brilliant and the performance is fantastic, which, like we were saying, isn't necessarily the case everywhere you go as well. So even though it may be a little behind in the camera, that doesn't mean that it's not ahead in other areas. And then it's, $200 cheaper than a Galaxy S8.
And what other phone has 8 gigs of RAM? I mean, I think there's another
right.
At least.
Bragging rights.
It's a Chinese phone or something that we can't get. One last thing I want to mention before we move to the next phone, and I'm sure we'll mention the OnePlus 5 many more times when we talk about the next phone, but is that the Oppo R11 is obviously, they're using the same sensors and lenses as the Oppo R11, which is a company that's also owned by the parent company of OnePlus. So there are certainly some economies of scale in terms of supply chain by going that route.
Mm-hmm.
Then the Oppo R11 only has a Snapdragon 660, but it's really interesting to me how close those two industrial designs are.
I mean, they're identical. I mean,
well, the flash is a little bit more
identical
to the right on the OnePlus, so it's clearly not the same machine, like the machine programming on carving out that piece of unibody, but it is close. And it's kind of, it's hard to not notice if you're like us reviewing phones and in the mobile tech business, like, oh, that, sure, it looks like the iPhone 7 Plus, but oh my God, the R11 is really what it looks like, right?
But most people people outside of China are going to go, what's
know.
an Oppo R11? What's Oppo?
Oh, yeah, exactly. So you'll be fine. So that's, I guess, and honestly, if they can bring us a phone for $480 because of that, kudos to them. I'm not going to knock them for it. HTC U11. You guys probably saw my review went live last week. I think shortly before or after the last podcast I did. I just want to point that out. Go to chip.com, chip like a computer chip, and chick like a small chicken.com, and check out my U11 review there. Lots of photo samples. It's a bit old now because the OnePlus 5 is the new kid on the block, but what do you think, Andrew, of the U11? For me, the biggest disappointment is the lack of headphone jack, and I could go on and on about that. But for you, what's your takeaway?
Yeah, I second the headphone jack situation, especially because this is not a small phone. I mean, it's not U Ultra size, but it's definitely not thin,
tiny,
svelte, anything like that.
It's a lot heavier and bigger feeling in hand than the OnePlus 5, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Even though their, rough dimensions are similar, but it's just like the heft of the U11 is definitely there. And, you expect that from an HTC phone. But overall, I'm super happy with it. It's the first phone from HTC I've in probably 3 years that I'm like, oh yeah, this directly competes with everything else around it. And I even say that, a month on. It's crazy how it feels like it's the old thing, but it's just went on, it's only been on sale for a couple weeks in the US, but
since last Monday.
Oh, is it only just over a week?
Maybe
wow.
It's been actually less than a week. I think it was midweek last week. It's sometime recently, recently.
So I have a Taiwanese model still, which I've been continuing to use the U11 despite not having all the proper LTE bands and things like that. Hasn't affected battery life. I think battery life has been, like I said, good enough there. But I'm just glad that they've, done something that altogether competes with the Galaxy S8, G6, even the Pixel in terms of its software performance.
For sure. I mean, I think it's a beautiful phone too.
From
it's
the
a
back
fingerprint.
Anyway.
Yeah, from the back. From the front, it's kind of like the OnePlus 5, very generic. But from the back, it's also a fingerprint magnet, so you're gonna have to wipe it down. I actually used the supplied case, that translucent case that came with it, which is already scratched to death.
That thing is. I've got it on there right now, and it got destroyed. It looks like it went through a street sweeper.
I know, but at the same time, that phone is so shiny that I don't see how else I can have it. Bare would be nasty looking after just a few hours. I think HTC nailed it, other than the headphone jack, and I think that the HTC 10 last year, I think, was definitely a step in the right direction, but it just didn't quite live up to what they kind of set out for themselves. And this year, obviously, not having partnered with AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon is a bit tricky.
Yeah.
Especially since if you buy the U11 unlocked on Verizon, it does not have CDMA support, which is the first phone that I know of that you can buy that's unlocked that there's no CDMA radio for 2G, 3G, and legacy text and voice support. Now, that's not a huge deal. Most markets have voice over LTE now and everything, but if you are a Verizon customer and you live or travel in parts of the US that are still very rural, you will have issues with the U11 where you won't, for example, with the Nexus or Pixel phones.
Right. I think that's one thing, like, if you're someone that drops to 3G.
Right. And you will... Also, interesting to note, I have the Sprint version of the U11, not the Taiwanese version, and that phone has CDMA support for Sprint.
Yeah.
So obviously the CDMA radio exists in the unlock unit, is just disabled somehow. Because the Snapdragon 835 has a built-in, Cat 16 LTE and all the good radios all in one. So it's really interesting, the choices that HTC made. I'm not sure if they weren't able to get carrier support or they chose not to pursue carrier support beyond Sprint. But
I would say more the former.
Probably because they didn't perform that well with the 10 last year in terms of sales. And I'm honestly not sure they will perform that well this year with the U11 in terms of sale. Sadly, but at the same time, what really, I keep using the phone and I keep getting impressed. Performance is really strong, battery life is great, and the camera is really, really good. It's not as fast overall, like starting up the camera shutter speed mashing the camera button sort of thing as the Galaxy S8 or the Pixel, but it's close. And the pictures in many, especially in low light, I think in some ways excel beyond what the Galaxy S8 and the Pixel can do.
Yeah, they're absolutely nailing it. I was super surprised having not spent, I know that the HTC 10, the camera was pretty good, but this is a nice step up from that, but it's also, spec-wise, they made the right decisions finally. They got this nice middle ground where they say, 12 megapixels, good enough, resolution-wise, but we did 1.4 micron pixels. We kept OIS, f1.7, like it's got all of those baselines. But like we just got done discussing, the processing has to be there too. And I feel like it's really, really good across, daylight, low light. I compared it to when I first reviewed it, compared it to the G6, the Pixel. It can handle, those situations very similarly to both those phones.
Yeah, it's very impressive. The camera keeps delighting me. I've posted a whole bunch of photos on my Twitter at Tankerl without the vowels, TNKGRL. I know you guys should know this by now, but check it out because it's really impressive. And I will be posting my OnePlus 5 pictures today, probably on Google Plus, all of them, so that a lot of people are asking to see the originals. It's kind of tough because I often edit my photos with the Google Photo app. So you're not going to get all of them to be raw, pure, like, I don't mean raw in terms of format. I mean like non-modified. Some of them are going to be cropped and edited just because I like to be creative. And I really believe that developing your photos is a part of the process. I used to be a bit hardcore about just getting the photos out of the phone straight up with the no edits. And now I'm finding that software editing, photo editing has gotten so good and it lets me do so much stuff so easily on phones that it's hard to ignore. And I find that it's part of my creative process now for taking photos.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I wrote up something on Android Central after we took a 2-week vacation in Europe where I took 95% of my photos with the G6. And I shared a whole bunch of the photos and said, like, look at all of these photos. But yes, I edited them in Google Photos, and a couple of them I even edited in Lightroom later on. But, I crop, and a lot of the times it's just a small crop or a level out of the horizon or something, and hit that auto enhance button in Google Photos.
Auto enhance is magical on that
It
app.
does a fantastic job, and I don't have any problem with doing any edits in Google Photos before I share them out. And the nice thing is, all those edits are synced across anywhere I view on Google Photos as well. So it's not like Lightroom where I feel I have to import and then I export and I have to keep the original and the edited version somewhere else. I just, I let it live in Google Photos and I don't mind doing a couple of tweaks.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And so I'm just warning you right now that I will, some of the photos will not be the actual output of the camera without processing, and some will. It doesn't mean you can't judge the photos because, obviously I'm not using the Photos app as a crutch. I'm more using it for my creative process, and I want to make that clear. But the U11, I don't have to do quite as much of that, it seems, and so that's good news. I love the performance. I feel that it's really low latency. We talked about that before. I love the fact that the software is pretty stock, even on the Sprint model. Get this, Andrew.
Really?
The Sprint model had 3 apps pre-installed. None of the Amazon apps were on there, that are normally an HTC staple.
And Sprint Zone installing a bunch of crap.
Well, Sprint Zone was there, but you could remove it, which is like, oh, wow. They really did a good job. It's very lightweight in terms of bloatware and crapware. And it does support gigabit LTE on Sprint's network, which I don't have access to here in San Francisco. But now, if you're in New Orleans, you can get gigabit LTE on the U11, so on Sprint. So, if you're that one Sprint customer in the universe, knock yourself out. I know that was mean. I'm sorry. I'm not a big fan of Sprint's network.
No,
I'm sure it's
not
getting
either.
better, but as a T-Mobile person myself, oof.
Well, so I had an interesting experience with it because I used the HTC Bolt late last year, which was...
Oh my God, I did too.
It ended up being a nice... It was a precursor of a lot of things that they were trying to do that ended up making it into the U11 in a lot better form.
Correct.
It showed us the way with the waterproofing and the lack of a headphone jack, all that. But around Seattle,
and with a
where
processor
I am,
that was a year old. But.
Yeah, that was nailed that nailed it. But I mean, around Seattle where I am, Sprint has improved pretty dramatically, but it's still like last night I was ranting about how AT&T is just still pretty rough up here. But everywhere in the city that I go, I run a speed test on T-Mobile and it's like 40 down, 40 up every single time and every single phone. And I don't have to be tied to having a Sprint specific phone to get it.
I know, it's kind of cool. And that's the thing about the Sprint phones. It's even swapping the SIM doesn't work. You need to activate on their website. Which should segue us into another topic very quickly. I don't want to completely abandon the U11, but I just want to, since, this is a perfect segue. eSIM. So I just want to call out Sherilyn Lowe at Engadget. I love her dearly. She's one of my favorite reviewers and one of my favorite Engadget editors. But Sherilyn, you're completely wrong about eSIM taking over the world. Well, you're not wrong about that. But you're wrong about why it should, and I don't think it's a good thing. eSIM, in case you don't know, is an electronic SIM card. What it means is that, and the Snapdragon 835 supports it, it means that the SIM card, instead of being a piece of plastic, and this is optional, like you can obviously still have a physical SIM card on your device, but the manufacturers now have the option of the Snapdragon 835 to have a electronic SIM card, which is basically a SIM card that lives inside the radio and software. And the way you provision that, you do it via software, obviously. So, for example, what it means is you buy a phone that doesn't have a SIM card slot anymore, or maybe it does, but you don't have to use it.
Like we've seen on some smartwatches.
And as we've seen on the iPad, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
The iPad has eSIM. So what it means is you call your carrier or you go online to your carrier and you can basically say, you do it with the device, the actual device that you're using. And you say, this is the device I want on this network. And it just creates a SIM card in software and puts it on there. And then you're good to go. And then you can obviously move that virtual SIM card from device to device. The problem is that, and this is one of the things that Sherilyn did not mention and talk about in her review, in her story, is that she looks at it as, SIM cards are old and obsolete and take up space in phones and we don't really need them anymore. But yes, we do, because you of all people, Sherilyn, should know this. You're changing phones all the time. I don't want to have to go into software and necessarily be online to swap SIMs. Like right now I can do it on an airplane, right? Just before it lands, I swap my SIM. I land, it works, right? And I travel a lot, so this happens. I have SIMs for several countries where I go regularly. And with your setup, I'd have to be online, probably on Wi-Fi, because, well, guess what? If I don't have T-Mobile and I'm abroad, I can't connect to data, so I need to find Wi-Fi at the airport. Then I need to log into my carrier's portal. The foreign carrier's portal, and say, hey, I want my SIM provision on this phone. And so,
what if you don't know about the carrier that you want to switch to? I mean, I land in a lot of places, we're going to trade shows or events, and I'm just picking up a SIM in the airport, the first kiosk that I see, and I'm just, whatever they want to give me. I don't know how to log in and go in and switch around all those things. There's something great about this SIM card being a key, and
that was
that it fits.
The point of SIM cards. They knew back then that eventually they could do this in software. In fact, CDMA was doing it in software. It's always had eSIMs, essentially, because you have like a UID or whatever it's called, UIUD, I think.
UDID, unique device identifier.
Thank you. Unique device identifier, right? That's what it is. And so they've done it like this forever. In fact, when you switch phones with Sprint, in addition to switching your SIM card, you actually have to log into Sprint's website. It's just cumbersome. Imagine you're in China, you don't speak Chinese, you go to a little 7-Eleven, they don't speak English, and you want a SIM card. Well, if you had to do this with eSIM, oh my God, like you'd be lost. You'd have to explain to them that you need to provision it. Their website might not support English. There, you just point at the SIM card with the number of minutes and gigabytes you want. You put your cash down, you walk away. There's also a level of anonymity here, right? In some countries, you need a passport to buy a SIM card, but in most places like Hong Kong, you just pay cash and you're done. And look, I'm not saying that, I'm trying to evade some sort of legal thing here by using cash to pay, but I like the idea of the freedom and the privacy of buying a SIM card without somebody tracking that I did. Most of the time I use a credit card anyway because I'm not paranoid, but but I could pay cash. And this is another thing. Like, to me, removing the SIM slot from phones is going to happen whether we like it or not, because the carriers, it's beneficial for them. But at the same time, it's honestly going to be a form of lock-in because nobody's going to be able to understand and figure out how to do it. But those of us who know what to do will be okay. Still, it's not as convenient as just swapping a tiny little fingernail-sized piece of plastic. Call me old-fashioned. Get off my freaking lawn, you kids.
No, I don't think you're off base in any way. The biggest thing is I understand that eSIM works, and like you said, I had totally forgotten about the iPad doing it. But smartwatches, it makes sense for something like that. It's smaller. You're not going to SIM swap your watch. It's not like I said, like a required piece of technology you have to have the minute that you land. Like, I need a 3G connection on my watch. But on your phone, it's something different. And the big thing is, I understand that eSIM works, but it's not that the current SIM system also works. And it works really well and has a lot of general benefits in terms of being able to choose your carrier and not have to worry about it. Obviously, we take it to heart more because we travel a lot more and don't necessarily want to use roaming all the time. I understand that if you're the person that walks into Verizon, you don't even probably know what a SIM card is.
You probably don't even know your phone has a SIM card.
Exactly, especially if you're on Verizon, because over previous years you didn't have one.
That's my point. Then Sherilyn's argument is all moot because they don't even know what a SIM card is. So what do they
didn't
care
need it
about
in the first
eSIM?
place. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, if they want to go to a carrier and the carrier's all they do when they go in and say, "Oh, I want a new phone," is they just take your SIM card out and put it in the other one. Like, they handle it for you. That's already, it's built into the system. It's not like it's hugely cumbersome to be able to, like you said, walk into the 7-Eleven in Hong Kong or the kiosk in Berlin Tegel Airport or anything and just get a SIM card. It's like, that's not a burden. It's not an issue. That's not like people are getting ripped off. Nobody's getting upsold. It provides tons of competition. As you know, when you go to any of these countries in Europe, you go to look at SIM cards. It's like you could choose whatever carrier you want, and they're all sitting right next to each other, and you can see all the prices side by side. You don't have to go navigate to a bunch of different websites, which, by the way, you don't have an internet connection to do.
Exactly.
To price compare at the time. And so the consumer ends up getting screwed because they go to the first carrier that's going to offer them, a page in English maybe and provision their phone.
I know. That's exactly my point. Thanks for saying that. And, yes, those of us on T-Mobile still use roaming. I mean, I love it. I use it all the time when I'm abroad.
And Project 5 for me.
Right. Because I have multiple phones, I like to at least have one of my other phones use a local SIM just for performance issues and to have a local number sometimes. And also with dual SIM phones like the OnePlus 5, I can keep my T-Mobile SIM in there and add a Taiwanese SIM for the time I'm in Taiwan and set the data to the Taiwanese SIM. And boom, now I've got, like super fast LTE. I was in Taiwan for Computex in Taipei, and it cost me something like $20 for unlimited data for 10 days.
Right.
It was probably a bit more than, probably like $22. It was 500 new Taiwan dollars. And this is a tourist SIM, they call it. Basically, you can't renew it. Mm-hmm. But it's valid for 10 days, unlimited data. I went so crazy on that SIM. Oh my God, it was so good. And that's cheap, right? Like, it was so convenient. I just walked to the store that was just down the street and just picked it up, and I was done. So, yeah, I don't know about eSIM. I'm not a fan, and I think that, maybe Sherilyn's article was kind of more like the devil's advocate, but I feel that I should call her out on the fact that she doesn't see the fact that this is a really important thing for a lot of us. And we're tech nerds, and a lot of people read Engadget are tech nerds. So,
but I think but I just feel like the bigger thing is that the current system is not broken. Yes, it requires a little bit of space in the phone, but as we've gotten down to nano SIMs, it's gotten smaller and smaller. I get that aspect of it, but that's not something that's worth throwing out all of the other benefits of physical SIM cards. And in general, I mean, not to take it down to the super low level, but it completely disadvantages people who, like I said, can't cross shop between SIMs or switch between SIMs. I talked to, we have a writer, Harish, who lives in India, and they have massive areas of the country that are covered by one carrier and not the other, and vice versa as you go through the different districts. And you want to have a dual SIM phone that you can swap between SIM cards on the fly. You may carry 2 or 3 and you swap them out depending on where you're visiting your family or where you are. And that's just not a seamless experience if you have to go through the eSIM route. And it's just, it just seems like it's a solution in search of, fixing something that's not broken.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not against it for my primary, my like having my primary carrier as an eSIM, because I rarely take that SIM out of my phone anyway. But still want to slot in the device, at least for a second SIM that's physical or dual SIMs that are physical is what I want. If a phone only had eSIM and not a SIM tray, I wouldn't be very happy with it. To me, it'd be like the headphone jack issue.
Sure.
Yeah. And we talked about this very briefly, but this headphone jack issue, it's not so much a lack of headphone jack that's annoying me, even though it requires an adapter and it makes it difficult for you to charge while using the phone. All of that is definitely a problem. For me, it's a sound quality issue, particularly on the U11 and the HTC phones, because I explained this in my review of the U11 on ChipChick. The biggest problem with USB-C audio, as we know it today, is that there are 2 standards. There's an analog standard and a digital standard. Now, the analog standard is basically something Intel implemented, and LeEco is using it on the Le Pro 3 and previously the Le Pro 2. Moto uses it on the Z and Z Force. It's basically, there's a DAC and an amp inside the phone. There's just no headphone jack. And so you plug this $2 dongle, which is just a piece of wire, into the USB-C port, and there's some resistors in there, and it says, hey, I'm an analog audio adapter. And the phone goes, oh, I recognize that. I'm equipped to handle that. And it switches the USB port to that format. And analog audio comes out of the pins into the headphone adapter, and you can listen to music. And so the sound quality is then dependent on the quality of the DAC and the quality of the headphone amp inside the phone, which, as you can imagine, are usually a packaged part of the SoC, part of the chipset, generally made by Qualcomm these days, and it will sound pretty decent no matter what, right?
Yeah,
then
absolutely.
The other side is what HTC is doing, where they don't have a DAC and a headphone amp.
It's completely non-standard.
Yeah, they have a cheaper DAC and a special amp for their speakers so that they can drive the speakers, the boom sound setup. And then they have basically a digital interface for USB-C audio, meaning that you can plug any standard USB sound card, as it were, to the USB-C port, and you'll get audio out. It'll detect it, and you'll get audio out. That little dongle that finally ships with the U11, because it's the first headphone jackless phone that they've shipped with an actual adapter. That is the reason they didn't ship the other ones with adapters, because that's an expensive adapter compared to the pass-through analog ones. It has a DAC and a headphone amp in it, and it costs $19 on their website, but it's cheap because the quality of the sound coming out of it is really cheap, because the DAC and amp are really cheap. And so you plug that thing in and you get audio out of that adapter, but it sounds like crap compared to even the cheapest Snapdragon chipset out there. And so we've gone from the HTC 10, who had super high quality DAC and headphone amp built in, to this completely disgusting sounding adapter that's in the box. And so the only way around that is to buy something like the FIO K1, for example, which is a pack of gum, well, smaller than that, half a pack of gum size USB headphone amp that doesn't have a battery in it. It's powered by the USB port. So you plug that in, and now you're getting some really high quality audio out. The problem is that that's $39, right? And plus you need a USB Type-C to micro USB cable to make it work, which unless you want to play with dongles, which is another $6 on Amazon. So you're talking about a $45 to $50 solution that now brings you back to the level of sound quality of an HTC 10 or a V20. And that's something that HTC just threw out the window with the excuse of we're all in on USB Type-C and we're all in on these Usonic headphones that, by the way, sound like crap. Even tuned, in my opinion. They're not even remotely as good as what I'm used to listening to. So that's my beef with the headphone jack on HTC's implementation. It's a digital interface. It's actually a standard interface. If you take their shitty $19 dongle, Andrew, and you plug it into a Pixel, it'll work.
Oh, really? Because the inbox headphones don't work.
Oh, no, but they don't because they require special firmware on the phone's end. Because the noise reduction and the the tuning stuff, they have built-in mics, so they don't appear as a standard USB device.
Right.
They're a proprietary USB device. But their dongle is a standard USB device. It'll work on any phone that has USB Type-C. Try it. It'll just work.
Interesting. Just in case I need 2 headphone jacks on my Pixel.
Correct. But of course, it sounds bad. So don't worry about it. So that's my beef, and that's what I wanted to explain. I'm with you on most of it. I'm not as big of an audio purist. I mean, for the most part, I listen over Bluetooth. For me, it's just a frustration of every once in a while, I want to plug into, I sit in a friend's car and I want to plug into their audio, their system. Like, oh, I have a podcast I want to listen to. Can't do it because I'm just not going to walk around with that dongle. And yes, their headphones in the box are their inbox headphones, but they do active noise cancellation. Like, I get that part, but this is again a thing because I switch phones a lot, as you do. I'm not going to remember to switch those headphones in my bag when, I always keep a pair of wired earbuds in my bag as a backup, just in case, my batteries die or, whatever I need backup headphones that'll just work. Again, I'm not going to keep the dongle around. I'm not going to keep those headphones around. So it's just a frustration thing for me. I get all of the audio quality points. The big thing is for me that they're not providing much to make up for the fact that I'm going to be frustrated very often by not having the headphone jack there. Yeah. And the other thing is, if you look at their market share right now and how well they're doing in the US, this is a very user hostile move that of all people, they shouldn't be able to get away with doing. Yeah.
It's very odd. I mean, it was extra odd on the U Ultra, which was just a massive phone.
Oh God, yeah.
For some reason, still didn't have the room for a headphone jack. Again, it's kind of like the SIM thing. Like, we know it takes up room, but that doesn't mean that you should just get rid of it because it takes up room. Like, other things in the phone take up room too. All of these other things. Like, it's all trade-offs. I don't care. Like, make the trade-off inside. Make it work. The OnePlus 5 offers a larger battery and a slimmer profile and still has, a speaker out the bottom and a USB-C port right next to the headphone jack.
Exactly. So you have no excuses, HTC.
Yeah.
Mostly because you're not Samsung. If Samsung had not put a headphone jack on their phones, we would have been really pissed off, but we would have been like, okay, they can totally get away with doing that.
I mean, look what they did with the fingerprint sensor too. I mean, they could have done that. They get away with it.
But they didn't because they're not user hostile. Hint, hint, hint. Anyway, speaking of audio, I just want to quickly remind you, in case you missed the news, I didn't write about it anywhere. I tweeted about it, I think. But Qualcomm came out with some new audio chipsets this week. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is kind of part of this discussion. They have really high-quality Bluetooth chipsets. And this is one of my beefs right now. The reason I don't use wireless earphones and headphones and earbuds is because I find the sound quality is not good enough. My minimum standard is aptX HD, which, as you know, is a lossless, super high quality codec for Bluetooth audio transmission. It requires Bluetooth 4 and up, but they have a new chipset that makes it really affordable and really simple to implement a Bluetooth set of earbuds or headphones or dongle that's wireless, that has power management, supports, charging the battery and all that, has really good quality DAC and really good quality headphone amp, and supports aptX HD, all in one super cheap chip. That's one chip they launched. They launched a similar chip for Bluetooth speakers and a similar chip for USB Type-C headphones. So basically, it's just a minor announcement, but it was a minor announcement that I think is going to impact the price point and the quality of wireless earbuds and headphones and speakers and even USB-C based headphones and earbuds going forward, in the sense that, right now it's much cheaper to make a quality analog thing because the analog part is, it been in the supply chain forever, right? It's just cable and a plug.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas right now, if you're trying to hit the $20 price point, you want to make Bluetooth headphones, you're going to sacrifice the sound quality of the drivers, of the actual little speakers inside the earbuds and headphones, because you are having to pay for the chip for Bluetooth, right? For the wireless part and the battery. And it's not a single chip in most cases. If you want quality, it's multiple chips. So this, I think, is going to solve a lot of problem. And that means that very soon, I think I'll be able to enjoy wireless audio, maybe with a little dongle that's actually a headphone jack on the end. That's actually a wireless Bluetooth 8 aptX HD dongle that lasts forever on a charge and is tiny, and I leave in my bag. And then I won't care about the headphone jack anymore because I still can use all my wired headphones with a tiny little high quality, basically what this FiO K1 is, this gum pack size USB headphone amp, but in a Bluetooth form factor.
I think we could all agree that Bluetooth audio could get a lot better.
And that's what I'm saying.
Just manufacturers don't use this as an excuse to remove your headphone jack. That's all.
Exactly. And at least for now, and or forever. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, because I did mention it, and I've had it for a while now, are the people that, from completely unrelated to anything, but I usually review the products that I feel that are interesting that are sent to me. And the Ring, the company that makes the Ring doorbell, sent me a Ring doorbell to use. And since I have a house in Portland, Oregon, that I spend some of my time in, I thought I'd set it up there. And it's been pretty awesome. So I know it's not a new product, but I haven't had one before, and I've played with it now. And it's kind of awkward to do a live video of that in some way. I do a lot of my videos on my YouTube channel live. I just wanted to mention that they sent me one. I like it. It's a great product. You should consider it if you, like me, get lots of packages delivered to your house. This problem. Andrew, you probably have a concierge downstairs, though, right, in your apartment building?
Yeah. So that's something I don't have to worry about.
Yeah, you have a human Ring doorbell.
Costs a lot more money.
It's much nicer. But for me, this has solved a lot of my problems. And there's motion sensing and all kinds of stuff. So check it out, Ring. I don't know what the URL is, but it's very well known, the Ring doorbell. Check it out. I just want to let you know I have one. I like it. It's a good product, etc., etc. And that's really all I wanted to say. Do you want to add anything? Maybe tell us what you have in your pockets right now, phone-wise, Andrew.
Oh, geez. I wish I had enough pockets. I think I'm going to keep the OnePlus 5 around for a little while longer. I'm excited, actually, to go back to using the Galaxy S8 for a little bit, because I've been jumping around to the U11, the OnePlus 5, and actually was spending some time with the Pixel as it gets a little bit older to see how that is. So I'm excited to get back to the Galaxy S8 as well, the standard smaller one. I can't do the Plus. So I think that's where I'm going to be at right now, is the OnePlus 5 and the Galaxy S8 for the most part.
Cool. I am basically using the OnePlus 5, the U11. I was at 4, or maybe a few more if I have my bag with me. But U11, OnePlus 5, Pixel XL, which is my main daily driver, and then I have a BlackBerry Key 1.
Oh, yeah, I don't have one of those.
I still like a lot, but you know what? I can't get used to the hardware keyboard. I mean, it's really good, but I just am too slow on it. I think if it was my main phone and I would hunker down and get back into it, I'd be golden, but...
Yeah, that's how I felt about the Priv. I just couldn't get up to speed with it.
So much faster with my Galaxy S8 or my G6 or whatever. I still have the S8 and the G6. I have an S8 Plus, by the way. And I use them, but they're not in daily circulation anymore. I pick them out when I need them for something. I wish I could have all these phones in daily circulation. I need more pockets. But these are good, and the U11 is remaining in my pocket surprisingly longer than I expected. I kind of did the review, and I published it, and I was like, okay, I'm done now. And then I was like, but I kind of like it. You're shiny, and you take such good photos.
You've been posting a lot of really good photos from the U11.
Oh, thank you. Do you want to plug yourself before we wind this down?
Yeah, the best place to find me is on Twitter, at my name. The last name is Martonik, Martonik. So it's Andrew Martonik. It's kind of a long one, but that's better than doing something weird with a bunch of symbols, I think. And that's where I publish all this stuff that hits Android Central all lands on there. So that's the best place to find me.
Yeah, sorry, I guess I've been mispronouncing your name.
Oh no, you're not far off.
I kind of, being somebody who've learned French as their first language, I tend to sometimes put the accent on the wrong syllable. Even though I've lived in North America for over 30 years.
I work with a bunch of Canadians as well, so I'm used to it. Oh my God,
yeah, so you're used to it. I'm Canadian too, English-speaking Canadian. I'm a bi-country, bi-language person. Listen, so thanks for being on. And again, read Andrew's review of the OnePlus 5 on Android Central. It's really great. Did you do the U11 review as well?
Yes, I did. I did that as well. So that's on our reviews page.
You get 2 reviews to read. I will link to your reviews in my notes. Check them out. And Andrew's an all-around awesome guy. You should follow him on all the Twitters and Facebooks and everywhere else.
Yes.
Thanks again for being on. If you want to find me, you know where to find me. I'm on this podcast, which is called the Mobile Tech Podcast at mobiletechpodcast.com. The hashtag for it is MobTechCast. And it's published by World Podcasts, who's doing all my technical work and my administrative and operational work. Awesome people. That's why I can bring you the podcast weekly, because I don't have to do too much work other than record it. You can find me on Twitter at Tankgirl without the vowels. That's TNKGRL, my YouTube channel, where I do a lot of unboxing and review videos, and I do them live usually, no editing that way. Is youtube.com/Myriam Joire. That's MYRIAMJOIRE. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast catcher. I'm on iTunes. I'm on Pocket Casts. I'm on everywhere. And Andrew, thanks again for being a rock star and being on my show.
Well, rock star, I'm not sure about that, but I really appreciate being on the show either way.
You are a phone rock star. That's how it goes. All right, guys. Bye, everybody. Guys, gals, folks. See you later. Cheers.
Bye.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.